Welcome to the picture book on scale and hierarchy. The point of this bit is to look at the pictures and think about them. I suppose the thinking is the most important part, but the looking gives you something to think about. There'll be two versions of this, the one that you're in now, which is the narrated version, and then a PDF that's just the pictures and the captions where you don't have me babbling on. All right, I hope you enjoy it. Thanks. All right, so you've probably recognized this from a picture I drew on the whiteboard shown in the inset there. Um, the picture I drew is of course inspired by this diagram. It illustrates hierarchy. It illustrates how we think about the organizational structure of, well, in this case, landscape management. That's probably what the LMR. I don't know what the LMO is. The point here is that to think about how we think about the organization of this figure riffs on the previous one. It shows that in the way I was talking about it in my diagram, where the big circles are universities, it shows that universities can be organized into networks as well. In this case, we're talking about landscape management, so you could have different landscape management organizations connected together into some kind of structure. It's not really a hierarchy, I don't think, but I'll leave that for you to think about. There's a lot going on in this figure, and the quality of my scan does not do it justice. You can see that time is in this figure, that the leafed canopy time frame is scales. Then you have minutes and hours, weeks. And you go from leaf to canopy, note not leaf to plant, leaf to the canopy of the tree as a whole, then the plant. And then you include plants into communities, and which then get eaten by herbivores. It illustrates the idea that at each level there are processes that go on that are unique to that level. It indicates that as you go between levels, the interactions can vary with time, and we'll come back to that at the end of the book. Okay, I think this is a pretty cool figure. The previous figure was about plants. This one's really about soils, but the picture is such a classic example of diagrams from physical geography that I had to include it. But again, note that there are different scales in the picture figure. There are different things going on. Things you might wonder about is, are there a hierarchy of processes in this figure? What's the relationship between the different kinds of soils? There's drainage. At what scale are things happening? But also you might just appreciate it, that it's a pretty cool picture. This one has some affinity with the Powers of 10 video, in that it zooms in from a regional scale through landscape, ecosystem, community, and then population hierarchies in this sense. But note that the physical scale, the length included in each of the cross sections and sub pictures gets smaller. I think it's I like all the pictures. That's why they're here. But it starts to give you the sense of how we look, where we look, how much do we include in our field of view, influences what we see. This is why I've beaten so heavily on the idea of being clear about where the boundaries in your systems diagrams are. In each of these subfigures, the boundary of consideration changes, and with that change, different features become predominant. Having expressed my affinity for all the figures in this book, this is one that maybe is lower on my list of affection. But still, it illustrates a very important point, and again, gets at the idea of boundaries. If you were only to look at patch 1, you wouldn't fully understand species 4. Similarly, if you were only to look at patch 2, you wouldn't fully understand species 4. Um, it gets at the idea, so boundaries again become an important thing. It gets at the idea that things move around, that you need to match your scale of consideration, your spatial scale in this case, of consideration with the thing that you're looking at. Um, that's really the core here. The caption here is worth reading. It goes into a nicer story than what I've told here. This one's perhaps a bit repetitive. It certainly echoes the figure a couple of pages back. I included it here because it goes all the way up to Earth, which is the ultimate boundary, I think, in the at least at least in the systems we're thinking about. Certainly, astronomers would think about systems with larger boundaries. Um, but again, it reminds us that the we will be shaped by, in this case, the taxa that we're trying to understand and manage. That taxa sits on a landscape. Well, in this case, it's called a management unit, but it sits physically someplace. That place has a number of physical characteristics. Topography, it looks like in this figure, it'll have a rainfall. It'll have animals. It'll have humans driving around in ATVs or cars or hunters. And then you work your way up through different scales. But again, like I said, I like it that it goes up to what I consider our ultimate boundary, the planet that we live on. So it's not just nature that has scales. Human organizations have scales as well. And while I think his name is Tufti, this visualization of data guy, wouldn't be real happy with this figure, the vertical doesn't really play any role, although it does look like it should mean something. But it shows that different parts of how humans exist on Earth have different time scales. Note here that the time scale is a logarithmic scale, so equal increments on the axis go by powers of 10 rather than sort of multiplying rather than adding. And note that as far as this author is concerned, once we get back past, say, 15,000 years or so, the time since Aboriginal occupation, humans weren't playing a role on the landscape, at least in terms of this figure. So when we talk about humans, we have to be very clear about whether we're talking about the evolution of humans or whether we're talking about some other scale, anthropological, say, scale of human activity. The government terms of office is actually a very important one. I've given it some thought, but not enough. And the important thing here is that some of these, well, many of these timescales are very short compared to the natural processes that we're trying to engage with. And so we come to the crescendo in our picture book here. There's a lot going on in these in this figure. So spend some time looking at it and thinking about it. The top bit is natural phenomenon, while the lower bit are things that are driven by humans. Note also, pay very close attention to the scales. While the numbers go in even increments, those numbers are the logarithms of some measure of the scale of the axis. So on the horizontal axis, you have spatial scale. How big is the thing? While on the vertical scale, you have the logarithm of time. So this figure shows how time and space of phenomenon can vary together. There's a lot of many versions of this. If you look in the top figure, you can see there's kind of a diagonal going from the lower left to the upper right, and that phenomenon turns up in many diagrams like this. Again, and then the lower diagram is where humans are interfering or intervening or having an impact, and it illustrates how long it takes a natural system. That idea is a little problematic, perhaps, to recover from the disturbance caused by humans. Um, where the top diagram represents more natural phenomenon, storms and that sort of thing. All right, read the caption and give this one some thought. And now for something completely different. This is a painting by Thomas Cole. It's called the Oxbow. I think the Oxbow near Mount Holyoke or something like that. It's a real scene. There's an interstate that goes through this figure now. It's in central Massachusetts in the Pioneer Valley. It's the Mount St. Holyoke or Mount Holyoke bit. There's a lot of detail that goes across a number of different scales. I'm not going to point out all the detail because some of it's kind of fun to find. And this is going to be your homework assignment. In the context of this picture book, look at this painting and find something to say in the context of scale and hierarchy. And then post that in a discussion that I will create shortly. By the time you see this, it should be up and going. The Hudson River School was, they were my favorite painters, and it's not my favorite, but I couldn't find my favorite. So have at it, enjoy.